indie and crowd-funded games. I wholeheartedly 100% agree with this. The idea is that today there really is, and I've used this term before, even on the Echo Screen Live, so on and so forth, here in the Weekly Wringer. The fact of the matter is that there is a renaissance of indie gaming going on. The strategy is different. Most game developers 20 years ago were trying to get on with a developer that was established, or one that was being backed significantly by a publisher, a traditional publisher relationship. What the thought was is you go out, you make the games that everybody else wants you to make, and then if you have a really awesome idea and they don't give you an opportunity, you split off and you make your own games, which was still risky and still tough to do, but was possible because you built a name building games at another studio. That really isn't the case anymore. You find a lot of people with a tremendous ambition. I can say this as I've taught at the college level in games development. I can tell you right now that when I talk to games students today, their ambition is to jump out and make their own game. Several of them do want to work for traditional publishers or traditional developers or traditional marketers or what have you, but most of them are looking for a way to express their creativity in their own game and believe, and I think rightly so, that they are uniquely positioned today to do that than they've ever been at any point in history. I think it's true. So that whole crowd-funded nature of things has changed everything. You know, that's, and by the way, I just mixed terms up. The indie conversation that I just had is one thing. The crowd-funded thing is a whole nother conversation. Think about the games that are getting made right now that never would have been made 20 years ago because there's the traditional developers and traditional publishers never knew that there was even a demand for them. Well, there is a demand, and now they can reach these people. The internet's changed that. So now if everyone goes out there and says, hey, I really, really, really want you know, I don't know, another Dig Dug or something, I don't know. You get out there and say, you know, all of a sudden you have 1,000 people that say, we want Dig Dug and we're willing to donate money to get it. Ears start to perk up a little bit. Then all of a sudden you get 1 million people, and now you got a seller, right? And we're seeing those kinds of things happen through crowdfunding that we've never seen in the past. The Beer Ninja talked about the fact that technology is a factor here. So while video games are not defined exclusively by technology, let's make that caveat, because good graphics don't mean good games. Good engines don't make good games. But the fact of the matter is, newer games seem much more engrossing, much more immersive than the older games did, simply by the fact that they are more immersive in nature. They do bring us into a different kind of world than those games were able to do. You might argue that they're less imaginative in that regard because they don't let you, as the player, kind of imagine what's happening as much. They take that away from you, as it were. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to say. I don't necessarily disagree with it. I just think that what is undeniable is that better technology is available to more people than has ever happened in the history of video gaming. If you look back even to the classics like Peter Molyneux, you know, when he goes to make Populous, he has to code his own game. He has to start from scratch and program his own game. You don't have to do that anymore. Now what you do is you have an idea. There are designers, there are programmers, there are marketers, there are artists, right? And all these people come together to make a concept. Now you might be good at 3 of those things and not 1, but that's okay because, you know, the guys at Epic Games have made the Unreal Engine, and you can even get most of the versions that have happened to this point for free right now on the internet and go and use it in your game. That's awesome. So we can't take technology out of the equation either. I agree with that 100%. Youngblood talked about the role of media hype, and I loved this comment. I thought that was fantastic. This really made me think on a much deeper level about what my opinion was. Here's why. Folks, I am now a part of the video game media. As the Clan of the Grey Wolf, we are now a part of that conversation. But at one point in time, all that we had, there was no internet, right? All we had to learn about in terms of video gaming came from magazines, came from the chatter from our friends who probably got their information from magazines, right? Or the actual games themselves, or, you know, trade shows, right? I mean, that was it, really. So now we live in this constant, you know, bubble of information, where information is constantly going back, forth, toward, back, wherever, all over. And we're all just completely immersed by it. It's hard to get away from it. That means that by the time a game comes out, for example, BioShock Infinite that I just purchased, I've known about that game for the better part of 2 years now and have been dying to play it. That is hype. That's media hype. If that media hype isn't there, how does that affect the conversation that we're having right now? In other words, if media hype is gone, are there as many good games or bad games? I don't know. It's a great question to ask. I'm not sure how it plays out. I think you could make an argument either way, that video games are better off without a media swarming it. But I think you could also make the argument that we need it. It's what propagates the good things that are happening in the industry, as well as some of the bad around the world, right? And keeps people interested in playing video games, and probably is what will end up being one of the key legitimizers of the medium as an artistic one. But a great point nonetheless. The male white mage talked about the fact that, hey, look, we got to define a good game, and the reason we got to do that is because it's really kind of a moving target. Perception is reality here, and the fact of the matter is that as Male White Mage pointed out, if you go back to some of the games that people put as their absolute favorites of all time and why gaming was so much better back then, they had terrible review scores. They were perceived terribly by the gaming public, so on and so forth. And maybe that perception has changed over time, no question about it, but we start to ask a question: what really designates a good game? What makes a game good? And if we change that definition at any particular point in time, then the whole of reality changes with it. This entire question changes as a result. So, but I would say also that me asking this is not necessarily confined to that particular definition or to any particular definition. I'm simply asking the question of, are there more good games now than there have been in the past? It doesn't matter necessarily how you define good games, and we could argue about the finite nature of the different ways to take that question anytime over a beer, but you don't have to answer that, I think, to be able to put out an answer of what, are more games better now than there have been in the past. Maze brought up, in this one particular sentence that she brought up that I just thought was awesome, and I have to repeat it. I'm not quoting here. I'm just gonna kind of paraphrase, but the unplayable junk of the past is gone. I think by and large, I agree with that wholeheartedly. There are some really bad mobile games that are just not good, that get made for some reason just as a money grab, but by and large, Maze is absolutely 100% correct. Folks, do yourself a favor and jump back even to the PS1, to the to the Super Nintendo, to the NES, and just laugh out loud as you see the horrible games that are absolutely almost unplayable because they're so bad. I'm not saying that there aren't trashy, terrible games that are made today. There are, absolutely. However, I think what we will see is that there's not the same kind of junk. So at the very least, the bottom of the barrel, horrible, crappy games, Superman 64, what was that crappy game we played during the SNES Marathon? Something's Kids. Lester the Unlikely, which actually wasn't, I wouldn't consider that to be so horrible. Like, it's actually playable. You could play it and become good at it, even though it makes it very difficult to do so. The fact of the matter is, those crappy games really don't get made anymore. They're really not around, and what you have are a much higher standard, I think, and I think that definitely affects the conversation. DTX 180 talks about technology mattering to a different level. So let's talk about PC. Let's talk about console. I think you'd probably get different answers if you focused on either. If you talked about PC games now, then maybe it's better, maybe it's worse, maybe it's the same. Talk about consoles, you might get a completely different answer. Consoles have changed tremendously. The PC gaming market really hasn't changed all that much in terms of the hardware. In terms of the audience, I think it probably hasn't changed that much. But in terms of implementation, it's changed tremendously. So you're going to get different different answers. And in a world where each and every AAA title is published for like 3 different systems, whether it be the 3 consoles or 2 consoles and PC or whatever, it's impossible to ignore that fact. I think it's a good point. I think it's legitimate, and I think I'm not sure I would agree with DTX 180's metrics that the answer is fundamentally different. But I again am looking at the scope of everything, PC and consoles included. Folks, every once in a while somebody makes a comment that basically perfectly summarizes exactly what I'm thinking about a particular subject. And I don't have to go far for this one, because I guess it shouldn't be all that unexpected. But proof, again, that even the blind squirrel catches a nut every once in a while. Mark P. Chan, the very artistic director of the Clan of the Grey Wolf, his comment about really summarizing, there's more creativity in more places, more locations, not just physical, but you see what I'm saying, spatially, different layers of abstraction. There's more creativity in more places in video gaming than there has ever been in history. And I 100% completely agree with that. I think every comment he made in that post was something I just went, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly right. And this is good. It probably gives away what my overall feeling is going to be, but I won't spoil that for you. I'll just tell you that I think you should read it because I think it is very important. There are so many different creative avenues that people can take these days that were either not available at all or were only in a small way available in the past. Those barriers are largely broken. Doesn't mean all those games get made. Doesn't mean all those games are good. But it certainly means those barriers are gone and that creativity is kind of out there. And you see people pushing the envelope of what it means to have a very, very good game, I think, on consoles and beyond. And while, you might strain sometimes to think beyond FPS and RPGs that are ridiculously popular or ridiculously good, folks, I think Mark Chan comes out and just nails it. So I'm not even going to steal his thunder. Dr. Super Caligula also had a sentence that bears repeating, and I have to tell it to you now, and I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Modern games make me wonder. Some modern games make me wonder how I played some of the older games without becoming completely and totally frustrated. Well, if you didn't become completely and totally frustrated, you are a better man than I, Dr. Caligula. However, I agree with this. I think it's difficult to compare, the essence of Skyrim, for example, and compare that on down the line to the earlier versions of the Elder Scrolls. Some of the Elder Scrolls games, which were very, very good, by the way, I would never be able to pick up again because Skyrim is so good. It distills all the goodness from that stuff, and it puts it into a completely new world and a vast, expansive place for me to explore and be immersed in. And that, to me, is exactly why I wouldn't go play that again. If I went and played it, I'd be horribly frustrated. Why the hell can't I do XYZ, which I can do in Skyrim? Why can't I do it in this game? That's the whole point. I think that happens more often than not. I think those rose-colored glasses of nostalgia, which all of us wear from time to time, get in the way of our understanding of what games used to be like and what they are now. Because if we look back, I think a lot of those games that we were looking at that we think were really great really weren't that great. Lol Death Hail says, and this follows the same vein of thought as Mark Chan, there's really better development talent out there now. Better producers, better artists, better technology, better game makers and producers that there has ever been in history. I agree with that. In fact, I think it's actually a matter of fact, right? There are more talented people out there trying to make video games now. It doesn't mean that there are more better, that doesn't necessarily mean better games are being produced. Don't let me lead you to believe that. I simply think it is a matter of fact that there are better game developers and that there are more of them all over the world, which is another interesting part,